Thank you, Gerry. I hope you can all hear me. There's nothing like an introduction like that to enhance my own considerable imposter syndrome, so thank you so much for that. And while it fills me with some degree of trepidation to be standing here right now, it's also a real honour and pleasure to talk to you about early career researchers. When I was asked to speak at this particular event, it took me right the way back to the very first time I'd attended a BERA conference. I'd just finished teaching in the East End of London. I'd never been to a proper academic conference like this. And so I came along kind of wide-eyed and came to the keynote lectures and attended the paper presentations. But I think the thing that really captured my imagination, which I wasn't really prepared for, were all of those fantastic bookstalls out there. And here you have to imagine that I was still cloaked in the mantle of my teacher identity. I was about to embark on my first proper job in a university, and for me, I just saw all of those amazing cheap opportunities to get some resources to get me through my first year. And I thought that those salespeople behind the counter, those book reps, were just incredibly nice and wanted to talk to me. It took some 3 or 4 hours on that very first day for me to fully realize the enormity of how incorrectly I had read that particular scenario. Those incredibly nice people, and they are incredibly nice, are in fact the country's leading senior commissioning editors, senior publishers, working for some of the largest publishing houses nationally and internationally on the world of education. And that scenario has stayed with me and is significant. It captured for me in many ways what Larve and Wenger talk about when we make that ever so gradual movement into our new careers, into our new professional networks. And we have to start to learn, very often, the informal ways of being in those particular institutions. And I'm going to come back to that, that sort of process as we move through this talk. There are some 30,000 early career researchers in the United Kingdom, although trying to get an exact figure is really difficult because ECR can mean so many different things to the individuals, to the organizations in which they work, and the wider professional and academic networks of which we're all involved in. The Arts and Humanities Research Council defines early career researcher as within 8 years of the award of PhD. Further afield, the European Research Council defines early stage researcher as within the first 4 years of a particular research trajectory. But even within our own institutions, definitions vary depending on the nature of the employment contract, embracing those with or without doctorates, right the way through to people who have up to 10 years post-PhD experience. So please forgive me if over the next half an hour or so, I appear to be trying to teach some members of this audience the gentle art of egg sucking. It's not my intention whatsoever. It's just to recognize that these definitions are hugely broadly sweeping, okay? And I'm going to mention a little bit more about that. I think it's really hard being an early career researcher. And I think coming into the world of education, many people feel mystified, distracted, baffled and bemused at what the job of being an academic is. I know I still have those thoughts now, and I'm relatively far into the whole process. ECRs are trying to establish your professional identity, develop your independence as a researcher, compete for grants, and increase your output, that terrible word that is used to describe the writing that follows on from the research. And very often, it's a word that denies that activity some of its emotional and creative endeavour. It's also really worth remembering that in sharp contrast to the physical and the natural sciences, ECRs in education are very often working on their own, and there are relatively few postdoctoral research fellowships available to those in education in comparison to the STEM subjects. You're also probably thinking about where you fit within your own department, your own academic community, your own institution, and your own discipline at the local, the national, and the international level. I think there's also, if only there were, no easily identifiable path to a successful academic community. And I think many educational professionals and paraprofessionals often struggle within a system that seems to grant more symbolic capital, more intellectual power, if you like, to abstract theorizing than perhaps the more concrete, very often small-scale exploratory studies that typify so many doctorates in education. Young and new researchers are not necessarily the same thing, but their conflation very often oversimplifies a really complex employment context where many of those working in education are often older at the start of their careers than those who are working in the natural sciences. And I think many university senior leadership teams still struggle with the implications of what that might mean for the professional learning opportunities of all of their staff in universities. Oops, come back to me. And as we become more refable and teffable, Marion Jones often reminds us of that dangerous bifurcation between research and teaching and how both become extremely significant as we navigate our way through an extremely tricky higher education policy context. And I think this can be really hard for those of us that love both research and teaching, and while at the same time recognizing that there is quite a degree of struggle for the prioritization of both for competition in time in the institutions in which we work. And I don't think that the TEF is likely to be doing us any favors whatsoever in resolving that particular dilemma in the next few years. Depending on the nature of the institution, the assumption that staff are both ex-teachers can itself be problematic, not just for those teachers, because very often it underestimates the degree of support that they might be requiring in terms of supporting their own research careers. But for those who've got little or no teaching experience, it underestimates the degree of support they might need in order to help them become better teachers. And I think a lot can be gained by bringing these two groups of people together more formally in universities, although that too can be tricky at times in what can appear like siloed cultures in some educational departments. So I think what ECRs need are easing into their position, time for research, time to carry out those bids, but even more than that, lots and lots of encouragement and institutional support. And as we're going to see, that institutional support is definitely there. It's just that the research over the last 4 to 5 years is flagging up that perhaps we're not that brilliant at signposting how best that support can be accessed. Economic crisis and austerity go hand in hand within a rapidly changing policy context for those entering university employment. In 1960, 22,500 people were awarded their degrees in the United Kingdom. Last year, 2.28 million people attended universities in the United Kingdom. The student population over the last 50 to 60 years has changed. It's more diverse, it's differently schooled, differently motivated. And I think this massification of universities and its declining resource base, both of these factors have huge implications for the ways in which we teach our students, for what we mean by success, and most importantly, how best we can support colleagues coming into this profession for the first time. And all of this at a time when brand image and visibility have become the hallmarks and mantras of what Gerry has referred to as a neoliberal corporate ethic that pervades so many universities. But in this rapidly transforming educational environment, being an early career researcher is intensely exciting. We look at amazing things, we talk to amazing people, we watch children, we observe colleagues, and the research potential within our own discipline is truly, truly infinite. Universities are places that radiate learning. Early career researchers in education are not just researchers, they are teachers, and to use Marilyn Cochrane-Smith's term, public intellectuals. And it is for these reasons that research promotion, public engagement, and teaching need to be supported by really carefully thought through and sensitively provided professional learning opportunities for early career researchers. Working as an academic in a university can indeed be a strange experience, particularly for those of us that might have had jobs elsewhere. At the risk of generalization here, in the real world, most employees work for an organization. The work for that organization is set by that organization, the goals for that organization are set, and the tasks that are engaged with, by and large, fulfill the needs of that organization. That's relatively simple. Grit Lodell and Jochen Glaser say that in university life and being an academic, it's not quite like that. And this is why early career researchers need such carefully thought through and planned professional learning opportunities. They argue that the unique relationship between the university and the various professional and academic networks that we engage with, those social collectives, those professional networks, those research organizations, those publishers, conference organizations like BERA, that these relationships are responsible for the many peculiar features of being an academic. Academic communities show many features of a profession, but are significantly different from them, in that these communities are in many ways their own clients. They are the sources of the tasks, and in many cases the recipients of the results, those research outputs, those published articles, even to a certain extent, this keynote lecture that I'm giving right now for BERA. And that this relationship, those authors argue, is why so many researchers working in universities feel decoupled from the very institution that actually employs them. So as we juggle the competing demands of teaching, research, administration, marketing, bidding, the list goes on and on and on, the significance and importance of high-quality mentorship cannot be underestimated. And here, Lodell and Glaser argue that actually early career researchers have not one, but actually three interrelated careers that we're trying to actually develop. The first is your cognitive career, the development of your research trail, those articles, those book chapters, those conference presentations, your scholarly capital that is going to become, if you like, your academic legacy, career number one. Career number two is your career within those academic and professional communities. In other words, your participation in the knowledge production associated with your fields and different disciplines, evidenced by the work that you do in those professional networks, the journal articles that you review for, the editorial teams that you might be starting to gain positions on, and any of that interrelated work that refers back to that professional capital building. And your third is the career that you're actually carving out within the institution that actually employs you. The place that pays your salary. Fingers crossed, gives you a desk and a computer to actually sit at. And that these three careers are necessarily interdependent, but they're also nuanced by the peculiar features of education as a discipline. And I think acknowledging these three separate careers can be so helpful for those of us, perhaps possibly defined as more senior colleagues, and working with ECRs in working out what best strategies should be fulfilled when and who best is in a position to offer that advice and guidance. The status of early career researchers has changed and transformed over the last 12 to 13 years. It started probably, I mean, if one has to go back and look for a benchmark, probably in 2002 with Sir Gareth Roberts' report, Set for Success. And with that report came what became known as Roberts' money. If we have senior colleagues in this audience, you may well have been the recipients of that money. It led, for example, to the setting up of Research Councils UK. It set up to many of the funding of its fellowships. It also led to the embedding of researcher skills development in many universities' HR departments. Since then, we've also witnessed the arrival of the Concordat to support the career development of researchers, the European Charter, and in 2008, Vitae arrived, the first national initiative to support and promote the careers of doctoral researchers and early career researchers. Many of you, I'm sure, will be familiar with the amazing work carried out under the Athena Swan Charter, established in 2005, originally to support the career development of women in the STEM subjects. It was only 2 years ago that this was extended to embrace the social sciences, arts, humanities, business and law. And the Charter now recognises the developments and the significance of gender equality far more broadly. So these are just some of the developments that have raised the profile of ECRs over the last 10 years. I could have touched on many more. And yet, despite these historic developments, recent studies have, on the one hand, highlighted the value placed on different forms of professional learning for early career researchers, but also showed considerable variability in the level of support ECRs actually receive in many of the universities that they work in. No surprises that ECRs really value the advice they receive on preparing grants, time to write, time to carry out research, and have access to high-quality mentorship. Many early career researchers wish to gain more methodological expertise that moves them away from the expertise they picked up in their doctorates. And that makes sense for most of us that have done our doctorates. The first 3 to 4 years we'll probably stay within our epistemological comfort zone, stay with the methods or the methods that we've used. It takes time for us to take those steps outside. Early career researchers working within my own area of teacher education, I talked about their need and desire for greater methodological expertise, and I'll come back to that moment in a moment. But they desire greater support to help with their academic writing and methodological experience. ECRs very often look to their former doctoral supervisors for advice and guidance. And I think this point is significant when we look at one of the largest studies carried out with ECRs back in 2014, a study referred to as the commonly known as the Oakley Report, identified that over half of ECRs did not feel fully informed of the training and development opportunities within their own institutions. And I think the implication here is that while many mid-career and senior academics offer brilliant advice about their own professional trajectories, their own experience in becoming an academic, very often we're not so well informed about the full availability of support and guidance within our own institutions. Another point that was highlighted by Oakley was that ECRs employed on research and teaching contracts very often feel better supported than those employed on teaching-only contracts. This suggests that recognition of who is and who is not a researcher and those definitions that I mentioned earlier about ECR are still hugely problematic, and that the institutional arrangements in many universities do not necessarily meet the needs of those most at need. And I've just mentioned teacher education, but those traits are shared by those in nursing and those in social work. So I think the message here, or one message, is for those of us that are more in senior positions, we need to do a lot more to find out what our own institutions can do in order to support those colleagues who are at the early stages of their own careers. I want to turn now to sort of 3 points of reflection that I want to kind of share with you. The first is on supervision. The higher I go up that academic structural food chain, the less I seem to be doing of the thing which I'm really, really passionate about, which is teaching. And therefore, I love working with students. I love working with my doctoral students. And for those of you that are close to completing your theses, or those of you that have just been awarded your doctoral theses, your PhDs, your EdDs, massive congratulations, by the way, then I would really encourage you as soon as possible to actually start the whole supervision process. And in your institutions, seek out training around supervision, around chairing vivas, and the examination process as a whole. There are some fantastic resources out there. I'm a huge fan of Pat Thompson and Barbara Kamler's work, but there are many, many more resources available to you, and I'll be very happy to email those to you or talk to you about those during the course of this conference. I think perhaps I naively became a supervisor thinking that it was all about training in the art of research, training in the art of writing, training in the art of subject content. I had fantastic supervisors, by the way. And while it certainly has huge elements of all of those, it's also about confidence building. And when you are an ECR, it's as much about the confidence building of your being a supervisor as much as it is about the confidence building of those that you are supervising. Supervision has forced me over time to read up around the subject areas of those I supervise, and that in itself has been invaluable professional learning. I started supervision thinking, what on earth can I possibly offer those that I'm supervising, without perhaps realizing what I'd picked up about the whole process of the doctoral experience. But the next steep learning curve was actually having my first doctoral completion. In other words, seeing somebody through from the start to the end of their doctoral journey. And here, what was significant was realizing the difference that examiners make to the final version of the thesis. And while I am certainly not saying that we should leave it up to the examiners, the realization that as a supervisor you are only part of the final trajectory of that final version of the thesis was an intensely liberating experience, and perhaps one that's not that necessarily widely acknowledged for those supervising for the first time. I say this to hopefully take some of that initial pressure off fledgling supervisors. I'd also encourage you to examine externally as soon as you possibly can do. And here I want to give Nick Pratt a big plug at the University of Plymouth. He heads the national network of EdD leaders. He'll be only too keen to hear from anybody in this audience that's keen to examine doctoral theses. Turning to the second of those three themes, there's a phrase which I sometimes struggle with, which is publish or perish. And I think it's particularly problematic, not least because of that policy context that I referred to a little bit earlier. There are many, many very, very good reasons why colleagues find it difficult to get published, despite their huge desire to do so. But writing is such a key process of the developmental and thinking process behind the work that we do. It gives faith to your students to see that you've been published, and the reviewing process is an exceptionally powerful form of professional development. You can gain superb editorial and writing experience by co-editing textbooks, book chapters, and journal special editions. It's great fun, and I do mean fun, to team up with 2 to 3 other colleagues to put together a proposal for a special edition of a journal. You will enhance your professional network, and you will hone in and sharpen the craft, your own writing craftsmanship. Your doctorates, of course, are going to be an amazing future supply of publications. And with judicious crafting, you can aim to publish separate articles on your methodology, your findings and implications for practice, your contributions to theory, and under the right circumstances, a policy-related article for the right policy journal. But there are also amazing opportunities to publish in professional practitioner journals. There is a danger, of course, that we over-milk those doctorates. But the reality is that most doctoral students and those people who've just got their doctorates don't realize the full potential they have for those sorts of publications. Writing in teams will also produce more frequently cited texts and can feature far more strongly on impact factors, although I do realize that this can be problematic or more problematic within the world of education. If your work just happens to be interdisciplinary, then the opportunities to look at journals from those different disciplines should be part of your overall hit list when you start to narrow down and start to target journals that you're going to be looking to publish in. Most journals now have fantastic advice and guidance on their web pages, particularly those coming from the leading publishers, and you can spend a really valuable afternoon just sitting through vodcasts and podcasts from leading authors, the opportunity to talk to colleagues here behind those stands that I mentioned earlier. When I'm writing for that national and international audience, I tend to imagine an imaginary colleague in Columbia. Somebody who has got excellent English, somebody who's got a fascination for the United Kingdom's various education systems, but somebody who's never been here before. And by imagining that particular person, I tend to avoid those unnecessary acronyms, that jargon and that Anglocentricity that can so often typify first draft versions of articles for publication. I'd also suggest that you contact journal editorial teams to see if you can review for them. It can be an invaluable way to get to know the journal, as well as fine-tuning your own antennae as to what makes for really, really good journal article writing. And as we move closer and closer to ref, then start to weave in those ref buzzwords of originality, rigor, and significance into the work that you actually do. And I think that it's going to be really, really important that the reviewers of those journal articles can see what is unique and original about the work that you do. That needs to be flagged up in your abstracts and in the discussions and conclusions of your articles. One final plug in terms of talking about publications is for the humble textbook. And I know that there can be really sometimes some considerable snobbery about the advantages and disadvantages of this type of writing. And I thought really carefully about what I should say about this, but I can certainly say that I found, and I continue to find, this type of writing hugely rewarding for so many reasons. It's helped me develop my own thinking, partly because those sorts of books force us to engage with a lot more broader areas of knowledge, which in turn can impact on the work that we do. It can be hugely rewarding in terms of the teaching and learning that we do with our own students. Even more than that, it can open up doorways with the publishers of those particular companies that you're writing for future publications further down the line. And they can be invaluable markers of your own professional expertise. For early career researchers, applying for funding and winning funding are clearly not the same thing. But they can be absolutely of equal importance. The fact that you are applying for funding sends out all of the right messages of dedication, enthusiasm, and passion, not just for your own discipline area, but for the institutions in which you work. And if you're actually lucky enough to win one of these bids, one of these grants, one of these awards, then this adds significant professional capital to your kind of research portfolio, for want of a better word, and perhaps just a tad more time to carry out more research and more writing. While the current funding climate in education is somewhat beleaguered, there are some fantastic opportunities specifically for ECRs. The British Academy postdoctoral fellowships are 3-year fellowship schemes awards made annually to outstanding early career researchers. Leverhulme offer 50% match funding for the salary costs of 3-year academic positions. The European Social Research Council, the ESRC, 10% of its studentship funding is going to be used from next month to fund 50 fellowships each year based on the new 14 of the new doctoral training partnerships that kickstart. Their new investigator grants are aimed at supporting those that make that transition from independent researcher right the way through to managing major grants, and they're worth between £100,000 and £300,000. And these are all specifically targeting early career researchers. In terms of writing those particular bids, those of you that have just got your doctorates, you've spent the most amazing amount of time and engagement developing and honing in your skills about writing critical literature reviews. Bids are a very, very different beast. They need to be written in a language that is accessible to all. Think about targeting a well-educated general reader. Don't try to wow people with academic concepts and theories. And don't place too much emphasis on the background. What you do need to clearly communicate is what is original and significant about your work, and your ability to handle and manage the resource implications and the finances and the management of your project. And if by any chance you are asked to attend a panel in order to present as a result of getting through that first or second wave, then do your research as to who will be on that panel. Practice, 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 and make sure that your institutions put you through a mock before you actually attend on the day. Above all, do not underestimate the time it takes. And that can be tricky because very often the announcements of these bids come through at very, very last minute. So in terms of concluding, I thought I'd try and hit you with 20 tips. Sorry, that's still the teacher. That's still the teacher in me. I'm not entirely sure how this is going to work, but let's go for it. Tip number 1, get to know your senior research colleagues, the directors of research in different parts of the universities in which you work. Most people do not in the university understand what we do in the world of education. And the opportunities for interdisciplinary research are growing minute by minute. Introduce yourself, make yourself known so that people can then remember you when the opportunity arises for a possibility of a really, really large research project around the corner. Tip 2, it had to be about blogs. Blogs are increasingly being recognized as measures of impact, increasingly. They present an invaluable opportunity for you to showcase your arguments from your conference presentations, your book chapters, your journal articles. Of course, I'm going to plug the BERA blog. We've just topped 350,000 downloads. We've only been going 2 years. I'll be thrilled to bits to talk to anybody at this conference. We've got an amazing editorial team. But there are many, many blogs out there. Talk to us. Get your work out there. Tie it in with when you're about to release a chapter or a journal article so that the two complement each other. You'll be amazed at the impact that that can actually have. Tip 3, ensure that you keep your own staff pages up to date on a monthly basis. And don't forget the gamification of academia with sites like ResearchGate. Do not underestimate the extent to which publishers, policymakers, lobbying groups, policy organizations, journalists look at these sites. You need to be updating these on a monthly basis. Offer to review articles for journals in your own area of research as part of a much longer-term strategy to target that particular journal for writing that you wish to try and get out there. It's really, really invaluable work, and the colleagues that work on those journals are really, really supportive, particularly if you've never done that before. Again, I'll be thrilled to bits to talk to you about that. Tip 5, similarly offer to review for the SIGs, the forums, the networks of organizations like BERA. You will be surprised, actually, at how little time it takes. You will be amazed at what you pick up from the abstracts. The abstracts are short, but it is a brilliant way to get to grips with the work that's being done in your fields and identify what is current thinking within your educational areas. And it's actually really, really rewarding work. Tip 6, schmooze, schmooze, schmooze. Your grant managers, your university research funding officers within your universities. Introduce yourself to them. Get them to know your first names, and you will be, again, amazed at how sometimes at the very last minute, an announcement will come in, and they'll contact you, send you an email saying, this might be in your particular area. It's worth just sort of just going and doing that little bit of kind of schmoozing. Tip 7, get accepted at a conference at least once a year. And when you get accepted, make sure that you write and produce a finished paper rather than a PowerPoint. And then ruthlessly use that opportunity at the conference to get as much critical feedback from that conference presentation with your paper, and immediately work on that when you return to submit that for your journal publications. The danger is that we move more and more to PowerPoint presentations, and we forget the opportunity we've got for actually exploiting that superb critical advice and guidance. Tip 8, aim to have one article under review while writing the next. It's basic. Tip 9, have a trusted friend who's not an academic. In my case, it's my long-suffering wife, who reads my abstracts, who reads my introductions, and who reads my conclusions to everything. If they can't understand those 3 vital sections, it's not their deficiency in understanding that is important. It is the lack of clarity in the golden thread of your argument that needs to be more powerfully brought through in those particular 3 sections. Tip 10, widen your methodological expertise. If you are a qualitative person, like me, then seek out quantitative methodological training in your institutions. This is increasingly becoming more and more important within this interdisciplinarity that I mentioned earlier on. Tip 11, try to have 2 mentors, not 1. A mentor that works within your own institution, a mentor that works in a research organization or a university further afield. Both will offer you invaluable advice and guidance while widening your professional arena. Tip 12, ensure that you are fully aware of the dedicated university-wide provision specifically for early career researchers. It exists. The research shows it's out there. It's just that we need to be better informed about how to access it. Remember what I said about those bookstores? They're not bookstores. Talk this week to those commissioning editors, those publishers. They want to hear, one of the main reasons they attend this conference is to get to grips with the latest ideas that you are actually generating through your own research. And they are lovely, lovely, lovely people. Tip 14, try to write and publish with your mentor or another member of your academic tribe. And remember what I said, more authors generally equates to higher levels of citation. Tip 15, seek out early career research forums in different universities. So many universities have these ECR forums, and they will be so pleased to have you say, look, is there any chance I can come over, present? They'll be thrilled possibly to talk to you about the opportunity of putting together a joint or multiple event with different forums. All of this is invaluable in terms of expanding your networks and honing in your area and field knowledge of the area that you're particularly interested in researching. Join up with 2 to 3 colleagues and put that proposal in for a special edition of a journal. I've mentioned the joys of that, doing that earlier on. It's fantastic in terms of sharpening your knowledge within the field and will raise your game in terms of being the go-to person within that particular area. I can't believe I just said go-to person. Apologies for that. Tip 17, exploit your PhD and your EdD thesis to the maximum. People don't do it. I said to you, the danger is that you'll over-milk it. You won't, because you won't have the time. But most people underestimate the publishing possibility there. You've spent so much time on that amazing body of work. Don't underestimate what you can do in terms of getting publications from it. Join any SIG, any forum, any network. Volunteer here during the course of this week. Colleagues will be so thrilled to have you. It will pay you dividends to actually, but I think we're up to, I'm not entirely sure, somebody will correct me here, I think we're on 33 SIGs here at BERA alone, 2 to 3 other forums as well, many being created as we speak. Tip 19, this is nothing to do with academia, I just think it's a lovely piece of advice, which it's just, you start answering emails in the day, you just get waylaid by that email detritus, you never get round, you feel by 1 o'clock I haven't done anything, etc. Answer your emails at the end of the day, go in, make sure that by lunchtime you feel really good about doing the stuff that you've actually wanted to do. And I thought about this, I wasn't sure if this was going to be kind of patronizing or not, but I just think it's really difficult to forget why we got into this incredible job in the first place. Write the sorts of publications that you want to write for in the sorts of publications that you wish to write for. In amongst everything I do, I still write for the very A-level sociology students that I used to teach many years ago, and I get as much enjoyment from that as I do any other type of writing I do. Hope that's been useful, hope I haven't done too much egg-sucking teaching, and that's where we're going to stop it. There you go.